onto the historic ice storm just last week.
Less than 100 people still without power. Actually, the number might be a little bit higher. We'll get into that in a minute. But while it's a huge improvement from the more than 200,000 outages we saw, it is leaving many to wonder what the utility company could have done differently. The auditors at openthebooks.com dug into the Austin Energy checkbook. CEO and founder Adam Andrzejewski joins us this morning. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Allison.
Adam, what did you and your team find out about Austin Energy and what could have been done to prevent the outages we had last week?
Well, the city of Austin, you have a celebrated tree canopy. What that means is you have to maintain it, especially when there's a big ice storm once every decade. And so we took a deep dive into the line-by-line spending in Austin Energy as they disclose it online. And here's what we found. Less than 1% of their total budget was spent on tree trimming. So their total budget is $1.5 billion, yet they spent only $12.3 million on tree trimming. So if you take a look at their vendor checkbook spending, that was about $360 million. And $12 million on tree trimming is only 3.4% of their vendor spending. And so they admit they were 3 years behind on tree trimming, on the tree trimming schedule. There's only two ways to prevent something that happened last week, and that's either you bury the power lines for about $10 billion worth of cost, or you spend tens of millions of dollars on tree trimming. And what we found is they just weren't doing it.
Yeah, we know that that is an issue City Council is looking into. Adam, you're calling for a performance audit of the city contractors. What does that entail?
So not only does the city leadership have to be held responsible for the ratepayer and taxpayer allocation of resources on tree trimming, but you got to hold the vendors, the tree trimming companies, accountable as well. So for the first time, breaking on your program, we break that down. So 11 out of every $12 was spent basically on two vendors, Ufsflund and Wright Tree Trimming Services. And so the audit has to focus on those two companies. And what I would like to see is a map of the outages overlaid with where those two companies did tree trimming last year. What were the lessons learned and how do you go forward with best practices?
Adam, can you put the amount of spending on tree trimming in context to other city services?
Well, this is what we found very peculiar. So Austin Energy spent less than $13 million on tree trimming. But $13 million was spent by the city of Austin on public relations and communications. That also failed during this ice storm. So you had $26 million, if you think about it, last year, spent on communications and tree trimming. And both of those systems failed.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are still angry following last week's storm. I know that you've been critical of the city's data as well. Can you go into detail about that?
Well, during the communications crisis at the city, one of the things up on the dashboard that they rolled out was the number of customers who had lost power. Well, it turns out that the definition of a customer is not the number of people. So a customer is actually a meter, and there's about 2.5 people on average per meter. So when there was 260,000 quote unquote customers that had lost power during the storm, that was about 750,000 Austinites who had lost power. So there's a real lack of transparency in how they even communicated the crisis.
I mean, this is just the start of this. I'm sure we're going to be talking about this more, but quite enlightening. Thank you so much, Adam. That was Adam Andrzejewski, the CEO of openthebooks.com.